Hey guys, quick note. I posted 2 versions of this story on my channel. Same concept, but different plot. You're watching version 1. Check out version 2 on my channel page after this and let me know which one you liked more. The last thing I remember from my previous life is the smell of cold barley tea going stale beside a ledger I had not looked up from in 11 hours. My name was Yujia. In Seoul, they called me the Iron Ledger, not because I was cold, though I was, but because I never made an error. 14 years building a conglomerate from a failing textile company into the third largest trading house in the country. I could read a set of account books the way other women read a letter from a lover. Every line a story, every discrepancy a confession. Numbers did not lie. People did. The numbers only recorded what people tried to hide. I died at 34, slumped over a quarterly summary, alone in a glass office 40 floors above a city that never went dark. I did not expect to wake up. I certainly did not expect to wake up here. I woke to the smell of mildew and cold ash. The ceiling above me was cracked plaster. The silk of the sleeping mat beneath me, once fine judging by the weave, had gone the gray-yellow of old cloth that has been washed too many times in too little water. Through the latticed window, pale winter light fell across a room that had been stripped of everything worth taking. I lay still and let the memories come. They arrived the way memories do after long grief, not in clean sequence, but in fragments, each one landing like a stone in still water, the ripple spreading before the next stone fell. My name here was Yoon Sori, eldest daughter of the late Lord Yoon Chang-shik, once a mid-ranking official of the Board of Revenue, now 3 years in the ground. The House of Yoon had been minor young Bon, respectable enough for a betrothal to the son of a senior official, not powerful enough to weather the catastrophe that followed my father's death. What followed my father's death was my stepmother. Lady Kim had come into the household when I was 12, already carrying the specific confidence of a woman who had surveyed the terrain and identified her strategy. My father, a man who understood revenue policy and nothing else, had been grateful for her competence and blind to its direction. By the time he died, she had ensured that every decision of consequence ran through her hands. Then came the debts. The account books, the young Boo, told a story of steady decline that accelerated sharply after my father's passing. Timber contracts canceled, tenant rents mysteriously reduced, a textile trading license, once our family's primary livelihood, hemorrhaging silver into obligations that seemed to multiply rather than diminish. Presiding over it all was merchant Guak Don Sam, our primary creditor, whose round face and gentle manner concealed the specific intelligence of a man who had spent 30 years making sure the families he lent money to never quite managed to pay him back. And 3 days ago, or rather 3 days before I arrived in this body, the son of 4th Minister Choi had returned my betrothal documents, formally, in writing, with language so carefully chosen that every word was a blade wrapped in silk. The House of Yoon, while distinguished in lineage, no longer presents the circumstances appropriate to the continuation of this arrangement. In plain terms, you are broke. You are a laughingstock, and my son will not attach his name to your ruin. I sat up slowly. The room moved with me, the walls tilting slightly before settling. Sori's body was hungry, not the ordinary hunger of a skipped meal, but the deep, skeletal hunger of someone who had been eating too little for too long. I catalogued what I had: one outer robe, frayed at the sleeves, a small bronze mirror, its surface clouded, a writing desk with an empty inkstone and 3 candle stubs, and in the locked chest beneath the desk, which I found the key to in the hollow of a cracked roof beam, a hiding place so obvious it was almost insulting, the family young Boo, 5 years of account records, stacked in descending order. I unlocked the chest. I pulled out the topmost volume. I opened it. And I felt, for the first time since waking in this body, something other than cold. I felt the particular sharpening that had defined my previous life, the narrowing of attention, the dismissal of everything irrelevant, the arrival of the only thing I was genuinely born to do. There you are, I thought, running my finger down a column of figures. Show me everything. In my previous life, I had audited companies that employed entire departments dedicated to concealing what they had done. Teams of people, years of layered misdirection, sophisticated instruments of obfuscation. The Jangbu of House Yoon was not sophisticated. It was the work of a moderately clever man who had counted on no one looking closely enough to notice. The estate records used a basic single-column system, income listed on one page, expenditure on the facing page, with no cross-referencing between the two. The Chungchigi, Im Daksam, had been maintaining these records for 11 years. For the first 8 years, the books were messy but honest, the messiness of a man who was not particularly skilled at accounting, not the messiness of deliberate concealment. Then, 3 years ago, the handwriting changed slightly. The entries became neater, more precise, more curated. I spread the last 3 years of records across the floor and began what I had spent 14 years learning to do. The merchants of Gaisong had developed their own method of cross-referencing accounts, the Gaisong Boogie, a system of recording every transaction twice, once as it left one party and once as it arrived at another, so that the two sides of any exchange could always be verified against each other. I had studied it in my previous life as a historical curiosity, the earliest known double-entry system in the Korean peninsula, refined over generations by traders who understood that trust required verification. Im Daksam had never heard of it. Merchant Guakdan-sam had certainly not planned for anyone in this household to know it. I worked through the night by candlelight, rebuilding every major transaction of the past 3 years in the Gaisong method. For every entry in the Jangbu, I traced the corresponding record, what should have been paid, what should have arrived, what the difference between the two implied about where the remainder had gone. By the time the winter dawn pressed gray through the window, I had my answer. The debt the House of Yoon owed to Guakdansam was recorded as 460 nyang, accumulated over 3 years of compounding obligation. The actual debt, once I stripped away the phantom expenses, the falsified vendor invoices, and the contracts that had been altered after signing, was 90 nyang. 370 nyang had been constructed from nothing. 370 nyang in fabricated obligation, piled upon a household whose grief had left it without the eyes to see what was being done to it. I closed the last volume. I sat in the gray morning light, very still, and felt the particular cold clarity that comes when you understand not just what has been done, but precisely how it was done, and precisely how to undo it. Then I called for the Chungchigi. M. Daksam was a man of 50, broad-shouldered, with the slightly startled expression of someone who had spent years operating in a certainty that he would never be questioned. He looked at me in the doorway of the study and clearly expected what he had always received from the Yoon household, a young woman in distress, easily redirected, easily managed. I did not speak immediately. I let him stand. Behind him, through the outer gate, the morning sounds of the household, the scrape of the kitchen fire being rebuilt, the muffled voices of servants who had not been paid in 4 months. I had already noted their names in the margin of the Jangbu. They would be paid first. "Sit down," I said. He blinked. In the 3 years he had managed this household, Suri had never given him a direct instruction without prefacing it with an apology. "My lady, I have the morning accounts to—" "Sit down." He sat. I placed the Janbu on the desk between us, open to the page I had marked. The timber sale to the Mapo Merchant House, 3rd month last year, recorded here as 40 yang received. That is correct, my lady. The Mapo Merchant House paid 62 yang for that timber. I have the original contract. I produced it from beneath the volume. I had found it in the back of the chest, folded small, perhaps intended to be destroyed and simply forgotten. You recorded 40. The difference of 22 yang does not appear anywhere in this ledger. I turned the page. Nor does it appear in the grain purchase records, the household maintenance accounts, or the wages register. I looked at him. Where is it? The color had drained from his face. The grain prices that year were... I have the market price records for every major grain dealer in Hanyang for the past 3 years. I did not, but I knew the figures from Sori's memories, which included a sharp and largely unacknowledged intelligence that had spent years cataloging the gap between what she was told and what she observed. The price you recorded is double the market rate for that season, which means either you paid twice the going price for inferior grain from a seller whose name appears nowhere else in these records, or the surplus was redirected. I paused. And I think we both know which it is. Daksam's hands, resting on his knees, had gone very still. You will account for every discrepancy I have marked in this ledger, I said. Every one. I have cross-referenced 3 years of records using the Gaisong method. I know what this household earned, what it spent, and what vanished between the two. The question now is not whether you answer for this. The question is how. He raised his head. My lady, Merchant Guok will not... Merchant Guok instructed you to do this, I said. Not a question. He closed his eyes briefly. How long? I said. The answer, when it came, was not surprising, but hearing it spoken aloud by the man who had executed it, sitting in my father's study, in the house my father had built, produced something in me that I recognized from my previous life, the cold, settling precision of absolute resolute. 3 years of systematic fraud, 3 years of manufactured debt designed to strip the House of Yoon of its remaining assets, the land, the trading license, the family seal, and transfer them, by perfectly legal-looking instruments, to Guokdan Sam's possession. My stepmother had not known. She was vain and careless and entirely capable of believing the household was genuinely failing because a household managed by her carelessness genuinely should have been. That was what had made it so elegant, real incompetence providing perfect cover for deliberate theft. Here is what you will do, I said. You will write a full accounting of every transaction you falsified, every amount, every date, every instruction you received from Guokdan Sam. You will sign it with your family seal. I met his eyes. In return, I will not bring this record to the magistrate's hall. You will remain employed in this household at reduced compensation until the debt you created has been repaid through your labor. You will speak to no one of this conversation, including Guokdan Sam, until I give you leave to do so. I paused. If you contact him before I am ready, I go to the magistrate the same day. The penalty for falsifying debt records against a young Bon household will ruin not only you but your son's prospects for the next generation. The fear of consequences that extend beyond oneself, universal in any century. Daksam picked up the brush. With the Chungjigi contained, I turned my attention to the estate itself. The Yoon family possessed several assets that 3 years of despair had rendered invisible. The manor house itself, though crumbling in places, sat on substantial land inside the city wall, land whose value had been quietly appreciating as Hanyang's population grew. There was a half-collapsed warehouse near the Mapo River landing, once part of a textile trading arrangement that had been allowed to lapse. And on the slopes of the estate's rear hill, running wild and untended, was a growth of plants that the servants called weeds and pulled up whenever they remembered to bother. I crouched in the frost-hardened soil of that slope on my 3rd morning and looked at what was growing there. Suk, mugwort, thick-stemmed and silver-leafed, covering the entire northern face. No hoe, the aloe plant, rare enough in this climate that its presence spoke to some ancestors' deliberate cultivation, now sprawling unchecked across a dozen pyong of good soil. Wild ginseng, thin-rooted and young, scattered throughout. Beside a frozen rain catch, a patch of dongbek, camellia trees, their winter buds tight-closed, their seeds rich with the oil that noble women paid dearly to comb through their hair. I had read in my previous life that the Joseon court had maintained detailed records of women's beauty preparations, that the noble women of the inner court had spent generations refining skin remedies from precisely these plants, documented eventually in encyclopedias of household wisdom. I had thought it quaint then. I did not think it quaint now. I stood up and looked at the neglected slope and saw with absolute clarity what it was. It was a manufacturing facility. It was raw inventory. It was the first product of what would become the trading house of House Yoon, rebuilt, expanded, and entirely beyond the reach of Gakdonsam by the time I was done. The estate kitchen became my distillation chamber. I sent the two most competent kitchen servants, a woman of 40 named Gapye and her daughter, Nari, who had her mother's hands and twice her mother's precision, to harvest the noho and the suk before the deepest cold settled in. I had them press the aloe gel using a method borrowed partly from what I remembered of hanbang preparation and partly from simple logic: cold press, cloth filter, glass vessel. The clear gel that emerged was faintly green, cooling to the touch, with a clean, herbal smell that disappeared within minutes of application. To this I added rice water, saltemul, the water from the morning's first rice washing, which had been discarded into the courtyard drain every day of Sori's remembered life. It went into a clay jar instead. Left overnight, the starch settled, and the clear liquid above it became the base of the second compound. From the camellia seeds, oil, pressed slowly, pale gold, with the faint, warm scent of something between wood and honey. The ginseng roots, too young for eating, barely thicker than a finger, were simmered in a sealed pot for 4 hours until the water took their color, then strained and reduced to a concentrated essence that smelled like cold earth and something older. Combined, filtered through 3 layers of the finest cloth I could find in the estate stores, poured into the small celadon bottles I had commissioned from a ceramics maker in the Western market at the cost of 8 nyang from the household's reserve, the preparation was clear, slightly viscous. It absorbed into skin in the time it took to breathe twice. I applied it to my face the first morning, and the second, and the third. By the 7th day, the gray-yellow exhaustion that Sori's skin had worn like a second garment was gone. In its place, a clarity, a faint luminescence, the look of skin that has been given back what years of cold and hunger and cheap lead powder had stripped from it. I stood before the small bronze mirror. I looked like someone who was winning. Now I needed an audience. Lady Park Hae-rang, wife of 3rd Inspector Park Yang-sun, was known for 3 things in Hanyang society: her weekly dasik gathering of noble ladies at her residence, her complete inability to resist anything that other women did not yet possess, and her skin, once praised, now quietly suffering beneath the white lead powder she applied in increasingly thick layers to conceal what the powder itself was causing. I had known Sori had met her twice at formal functions, enough for an introduction, not enough for the assumption of friendship that I needed to leverage. I spent one of the household's remaining young on a single small gift, a bundle of the finest dried sook from the estate's slope, tied with undyed linen cord, accompanied by a note in my best calligraphy, explaining that the herb was harvested from the Yoon estate's own hillside, and that its preparation as a morning steam was said by the court physicians' wives to be beneficial for the complexion in winter weather. The note mentioned nothing about what I was creating. It mentioned nothing about the preparation itself. It was, purely, a gift from one Yangban household to another, with no commercial intent visible anywhere in its presentation. Lady Park sent a reply within 2 days. She invited me to the following week's dasik. I arrived at Lady Park's gathering wearing my best remaining outer robe, mended at the hem, pressed with a hot stone until it sat well, and nothing on my face, No powder, no Manhwa, nothing. The room was warm with brazier heat and the smell of pine cake and sweet sujanggwa. 8 women of varying rank, all of them wearing the white lead powder that was the standard of court-adjacent beauty in this season, all of them arranged with the careful social geometry of a gathering where every chair placement communicated something. They looked at my face. I let them look. I poured my tea, I ate my dasik, I spoke when spoken to with the measured courtesy of someone entirely at ease. By the 3rd cup of tea, Lady Oh Byung-sin, wife of a Board of Works official, the most fashion-conscious woman in the room and therefore the most dangerous social force in it, set down her own cup and said, with the casual directness of someone who considers pretense a waste of effort, "Yoon Agassi, what are you using on your face?" Not a question. I allowed a small expression of surprise, as if the observation had been the entire purpose of my attendance. "I beg your pardon?" "Your complexion," she said. "Whatever you're using, tell me." I set down my cup. I let a moment pass, just long enough for every woman in the room to lean, imperceptibly, forward. "I have been using a preparation from the estate," I said at last. "An old household formula, my mother's recipe recovered from her personal effects after she passed." I paused. "I am not certain it is appropriate to discuss at a gathering such as this. The preparation takes 3 months of cold filtering to achieve the correct clarity. The ingredients are from our Yoon estate's own cultivation. We produce very little." "I want some," Lady O said. "I am afraid there is none to spare at present. The current batch is only enough for the household's use through this winter." The silence that followed had a specific quality. I had encountered it before, in boardrooms and across negotiating tables, the silence of people recalibrating the value of something they had just been told they could not have. "What if I placed an order for the next batch?" Lady Park said. I allowed my expression to show polite regret. "The next batch will not be ready until late spring, and the demand—" I paused. "Several requests have already been made through my household." This was untrue. There were no other requests, but there would be. "Would you accept a deposit in advance?" Lady O said. "I will accept a deposit against 1 bottle of the spring batch." By the time I left Lady Park's gathering, I had accepted deposits from 5 women, at 40 nyang per deposit, 200 nyang collected in promises, on a preparation that had cost me 8 nyang in celadon bottles and the labor of 2 kitchen servants. I walked home through the winter streets of Hanyang and did not permit myself to smile until I was through the gate and alone in the courtyard. Then I sat on the cold stone step and let it out, not triumph exactly, but the feeling I had known my whole previous life and had not felt once since waking in this body, the bone-deep satisfaction of a well-constructed move landing precisely where it was placed. I had work to do. 200 nyang changed what was possible. The household servants were paid first, 3 months of withheld wages, distributed by household rank, with a note that further wages would be paid monthly and on time. The look on Gapye's face when she received the envelope told me more about what the household had suffered than 3 years of Jangbu records. I used the remainder to purchase raw materials in bulk, move the distillation operation from the kitchen to the estate warehouse, now repaired, its collapsed section rebuilt with timber from our own back grove, and commission 2 additional sets of celadon bottles from the ceramics maker, this time with a small embossed design, a single camellia blossom pressed into the clay before firing. I named the preparation Ne Wanjuk, Inner Court Dew. The name did 3 things simultaneously. It invoked the aesthetic of the royal court, suggesting a preparation refined enough for palace use. It described the product truthfully, a clear, dew-like fluid born of the estate's inner cultivation, and it created, without stating anything false, an impression of heritage and exclusivity that price alone could not have manufactured. Across the following 3 weeks, word moved through Han Yang's noble households with the speed that only genuine scarcity can produce. I received 7 additional deposit requests. I accepted 4 and declined 3, declining with the same expression of regretful insufficiency, because a waiting list only acquires value when people are genuinely left on it. I produced the spring batch on schedule. I delivered each bottle personally, wrapped in pale blue cloth, sealed with the Yoon family seal in red. I accompanied each delivery with a small handwritten card describing the preparation's method, vague enough to be romantic, specific enough to sound authoritative. Every single recipient sent word within a fortnight requesting the next bottle. I had, without opening a single shop stall, without paying a single licensing fee to the Sejeon Guild, without conducting a single transaction that looked like trade rather than the private exchange of household preparations between Yangban families, created a clientele. It was time to scale. The gaiku of merchant Sok Chansu sat at the edge of the Mapo market landing, close enough to the river that the smell of the Han's winter ice came through the walls in cold weather. It was the kind of establishment that had once been prosperous and wore its former prosperity like old court dress. The bones were good, the fabric was wearing through. Sok Chansu himself was 63, with the weathered face of a man who had spent 4 decades watching younger merchants with less scruples and more connections accumulate what he had been too honest to accumulate himself. He sold dried goods and medicinal herbs from the provinces. He knew every Bobu song, traveling merchant, route from the southern coast to the northern pass. He was also, as I had confirmed through 3 careful inquiries, entirely clean of any connection to Guakdan Sam. I arrived at his gaiku on a gray morning in the 2nd month and stated my purpose without preamble. I had found in my previous life that the most efficient way to open a negotiation with a tired and honest person was to skip the preliminary theater. I am Lady Yoon Sori of House Yoon. I have a preparation that 12 noble households in Hanyang are currently waiting to purchase. I need a reliable supply of no hui, insam bangi seedlings, camellia seeds, and suk from cultivation sources outside the Sejeon licensing system, and I need discretion. I paused. In exchange, I will route all purchasing through your gaiku at a commission of 15 pun per nyang of transaction value, and I will formalize that arrangement in writing with my family seal. Sok Chansu looked at me for a long moment. "You're Lord Yoon's daughter," he said. "I am." "Your family owes Guakdan Sam." "My family owes Guakdan Sam considerably less than is recorded in his debt register," I said. "That is a matter I am in the process of resolving. It will not affect our arrangement." Another pause. Then something shifted in his expression, the shift of a man who has spent 40 years watching cleverness dressed as innocence and has just recognized the real thing. 15 pun is too low, he said. "You're right," I said. 20 pun. He raised an eyebrow. "I'm aware that 20 is higher than your counteroffer would have been," I said. "I'm giving it to you because I need you to be invested in this arrangement succeeding. A man earning fair commission protects his client's interests. A man who feels underpaid finds ways to compensate the difference." Sok Chansu was quiet for a moment. Then he laughed, the real laugh of someone who has not been genuinely surprised in years. "All right, my lady," he said. 20 pun. And I want it in writing with that seal before I source the first shipment. I brought the paper, I said, and produced it from my sleeve. Guakdan Sam was not a foolish man. He had built his position over 20 years of careful maneuvering, extending credit to struggling Yangban households, then systematically making that credit impossible to repay, then accepting land and licenses in settlement of debts that had been deliberately inflated beyond any household's ability to clear. He owned, through instruments of varying legality, partial claims on 11 estates within a day's travel of Hanyang. He was not accustomed to being ignored. When I refused 3 consecutive summons to his main hall to discuss the account standing of House Yoon, he began moving. First, he sent word to his network within the Sijan licensed merchant system, the web of relationships he had spent 2 decades cultivating among the stallholders and guild heads of Hanyang's main trading street. The message, delivered through intermediaries with the careful indirection of a man who understood that direct threats leave evidence, was clear. The household of House Yoon was attempting irregular trade with medicinal preparations without proper Sijan licensing. Any merchant found supplying raw materials to them would find their own licensing arrangements reviewed. Within 4 days, 2 of my 3 provincial suppliers received visits from Guok's intermediaries. Within a week, both had sent regretful cancellations to Seok Chan-su's Gekju. I was not surprised. I had planned for this. What I had not planned for was what Guok did next. On the 15th day of the 2nd month, a rumor began moving through Hanyang's noble households with the particular speed of information specifically designed to travel. The preparation sold by House Yoon contains ingredients of uncertain provenance. One of the ladies who used it found her skin inflamed. A physician of good standing has noted that some of the components may be improperly prepared. It reached Lady O's household within 2 days. She sent a message to my gate, formal, cautious, non-committal, the language of a woman who had not yet decided whether to withdraw, but was leaving herself a door. I read the message twice. Then I read it a 3rd time because what it told me was not only that Guok Dan-sam had moved against my product's reputation, it was that he had done it before I had established anything formal enough to defend through official channels. I had been operating, deliberately, outside the visible structures of commerce. No Sijan license, no formal merchant registration, household-to-household exchange, technically outside the category of trade. That invisibility, which had been my protection, was now my vulnerability. I needed to become visible, and I needed to do it on my own terms. I went to the Bureau of Works the following morning. The process of registering a formal household trading license under the Sijan framework was designed to be slow. It required documentation of the household's standing, attestation of product quality from a recognized authority, a processing fee, and approval from the relevant guild head, in the case of medicinal preparations, the head of the Apothecary Merchants Association. The relevant guild head was a man named Choi Byung-mon, who had held the position for 12 years and whose relationship with Guok Dan-sam was of the kind that does not need to be documented to be understood. I did not go to Choi Byung-mon. I went to the wife of the 3rd Inspector of the Board of Revenue, whose husband's office oversaw, among other responsibilities, the accuracy of merchant guild records, and I paid a formal visit with a gift of Nawan juk and a conversation about the particular excellence of her complexion that lasted 40 minutes and included, almost incidentally, a discussion of certain irregularities I had encountered in the licensing fee structures of the Apothecary Guild. The 3rd Inspector's office opened a review 3 days later. While the review proceeded, I moved on to the supply problem. Seok Chan-su's provincial routes were compromised. Guok Dan-sam's Sijan network had made local sourcing difficult. I needed raw materials from outside his reach. The Bobu Song, the traveling merchants who carried goods between provincial towns and the capital, operating outside the licensed Sijan system by ancient custom, answered to no guild. They traveled their own routes, maintained their own accounts, and owed nothing to Hanyang's merchant establishment. I knew their gathering point from Sori's memories, the inn district outside Dongdaemun Gate, where the roads from the south and east converged before entering the capital. I went at dawn with Seok Chan-su, who was known to them, and I laid out a simple proposal. The Bobu Song carried, among other goods, the herbs and botanical materials I needed. They currently sold these to Sijan merchants at rates set by the guild, rates that, as anyone who had examined the records would note, had not meaningfully increased in a decade, despite rising transport costs and increasing demand. I offered direct purchase at 15% above the current guild rate, immediate payment in Songpyeong Tongbo copper coin, consistent volume orders specified in advance so they could plan their routes accordingly. The Bobu Song merchant who spoke for the group, a woman of 50 with the road-tanned skin of someone who had spent 30 years in all weather, looked at me for a long moment. "You're the Yoon girl," she said. "I am." "Guakdan Song says you owe him 400 nyang." "Guakdan Som says many things," I said. "I have documentation demonstrating that the accurate figure is considerably lower. This documentation is currently with the magistrate's review office." A pause. "You've gone to the magistrate?" I said. "I have prepared documentation for the magistrate. I have not yet submitted it. I am giving Merchant Guak the opportunity to correct the record himself before I do." The Bobu Song woman looked at Siak Chan-su. He made the expression of a man who had known me for a month and had already stopped being surprised by anything I said. 15% above guild rate, she repeated. Paid immediately upon delivery. Another long pause. "Add 10 poon per goon for the no-hui," she said. "It's harder to transport than you're accounting for." "Done," I said. We sealed it with a hand clasp, the way Bobu Song merchants sealed every agreement because they had learned long ago that seals on paper were less reliable than the memory of a deal struck face-to-face with witnesses present. In the 6th week after my arrival in this body, I requested a formal meeting with Guak Dan Sam. He received me in his main hall with the composed magnanimity of a man who believes he holds every piece on the board. The hall was designed to communicate exactly this: polished floors, lacquered screens, the quiet evidence of accumulated wealth arranged with the unself-consciousness of someone who has stopped noticing that he is displaying it. He poured tea. He asked after my household's health. He made the gentle, regretful sounds of a man whose affection for the House of Yoon was only shadowed by the sorrow at the difficulty of its current circumstances. I let him finish. Then I placed a document on the table between us. "I have completed a full audit of the House of Yoon's account with your merchant house," I said, "using the Gaisong cross-referencing method, which I believe you will find produces results consistent with the original transaction records. The originals, not the copies currently held in our household Jangbu." Something shifted in his face, barely, but I was watching for it. The actual outstanding balance, once phantom expenses, falsified invoices, and improperly applied compound obligations are removed, is 87 yang. I paused. I am prepared to settle this balance today. I produced the second document. "This is a signed statement from Im Dak-sam, your former intermediary in the House of Yoon household, attesting to the specific instructions he received from your merchant house regarding the modification of account records. It includes dates, figures, and the names of 3 additional Yangban households he indicates received similar treatment." Guak Dan Sam set down his teacup. "I do not know what you believe you—" "I am not finished," I said. "This third document is a summary of the licensing review currently underway at the Board of Revenue's Oversight Office, initiated following a review request from the 3rd Inspector's Office. The focus of the review is the Apothecary Guild's licensing fee structure, the accuracy of guild membership records, and the documented relationship between the guild head's approval decisions and certain outstanding debt arrangements with your merchant house." The hall was very quiet. "What I am offering you," I said, "is a choice. The first option, I submit Im Dak-sam's statement and the account discrepancy documentation to the magistrate's hall today, along with a formal complaint from House Yoon and a request for investigation of the 3 additional households named in the statement. The Board of Revenue review proceeds. The results are, as I am sure you can calculate, not favorable to your continued operation." I let this settle. "The second option, you accept 87 yang as full settlement of the House of Yoon's account, signed and sealed today. You transfer the Yoon family trading license, which your merchant house holds as collateral against the fabricated debt, back to House Yoon, with documentation of clear title. You withdraw your intermediaries from the Bobu Song routes and the Ma Po landing supply network, and you retire from any involvement in the commercial affairs of the households named in M. Dak Sam's statement. Guak Dan Sam looked at me across the table. I had known men like him in my previous life, men who had built their power on the assumption that no one would look closely enough to challenge it, men for whom the idea that a 22-year-old girl from a failing Yangban household had dismantled 3 years of careful construction in 6 weeks was not merely surprising, but genuinely incomprehensible. "You have no—" "I have everything I need," I said. "What I am offering you is the option to lose this quietly rather than publicly. I would recommend taking it." The silence stretched. In it, I heard the specific sound of a man calculating what he had left and finding the answer insufficient. He picked up the brush. The settlement took 3 days to fully execute. The document transfers, the seal registrations, the formal return of the trading license to House Yoon's name. On the 4th day, I registered Naewonjuk as a formal household preparation under the newly obtained trading license. Sok Chansu's Gaikju became the official distribution house for House Yoon's commercial accounts. On the 7th day, I submitted a separate, carefully worded letter to the Board of Revenue's Oversight Office, acknowledging that certain irregularities in the account records of House Yoon had been resolved through private settlement, and providing a summary of the Gaesong method I had used to identify them, offered in the spirit of improving the accuracy of household account standards generally. This letter was read by the 3rd inspector, who passed it to the Board of Revenue, where it eventually reached the desk of an official who had been looking for a standardized cross-referencing method for merchant account audits for the better part of a year. I did not pursue this thread immediately, but I noted it. My stepmother came to me in the evening of the 2nd week. She stood in the doorway of what had been my father's study, now cleared, aired, the cracked plaster replastered with lime from the estate's own kilns, with the expression of a woman who has rehearsed a conversation and found, upon arrival, that the room she had imagined herself entering no longer existed. "The accounts," she said. "The servants say the wages have been paid." "They have." "And the guac merchant?" "His claims against this household have been settled and cleared." I looked at her steadily. "The trading license has been restored to House Yoon's name. The estate accounts are current. The debt is resolved." She was quiet for a long moment. "How?" she said. "Carefully," I said. She looked at me, really looked at me, with the expression of someone encountering a version of a person they had long since stopped seeing clearly. "Your father," she said at last, "used to say you were too quiet, that you observed too much and spoke too little." "My father was an excellent official," I said. "He was not always right." She left without another word. I did not know what she made of it. I found I did not need to. On the first warm morning of spring, when the frost had finally left the courtyard stones and the camellia trees on the estate slope were pushing out their dark, glossy leaves, I sat in my father's study with a cup of boricha and the House of Yoon's current account ledger. The ledger was new. I had commissioned it myself. Good paper, proper binding, formatted in the Gaesong double-entry method with separate columns for every category of transaction. It was the most useful thing I owned. The final entry of the previous month read, "Balance in favor of House Yoon, 412 nyang, 3 jian." 412 nyang. Earned, not inherited. Earned through the clear gel in the Celadon bottles stacked in the estate warehouse, through the Bobu Song routes running clean through Sok Chansu's Gaikju, through 12 noble households whose complexions had improved measurably since the previous winter, and who had each sent word requesting the summer preparation. The trading license on the desk beside me bore the House of Yoon's seal: restored, clean, mine. On the wall, where I had hung it the morning after the settlement, the original timber contract that Im Dak-sam meant to destroy, not as sentiment, as a reminder of what a single overlooked document could be worth in the right hands. From outside the gate, the sounds of the Mapo landing carried on the spring air, merchants calling, carts on stone, the particular layered noise of a city engaged in the relentless business of exchange. I had grown up hearing those sounds without understanding what they meant. Now I heard them the way I had once heard the hum of a Seoul trading floor, not as noise but as information, constantly updating, constantly readable. I refilled my cup. The summer Naewonjuk formula needed adjusting. I had been thinking about a preparation for the warmer months, lighter than the winter compound, better suited for the humidity that would descend on Hanyang by the 5th month. I had notes to review, a supply arrangement to finalize, a proposal from Sok Chon-soo about extending the Bobu Song agreement to include fabrics from the southern weaving towns. And there was the matter of the Board of Revenue official who had sent a carefully worded inquiry to the House of Yoon's registered trading address last week, asking whether the person who authored the account standardization letter might be willing to consult on a project involving merchant guild record reform. I had not yet replied. I picked up the brush. I was not who I had been when I arrived in this body. Sori's memories had become mine, the cold and the hunger and the years of quiet endurance absorbed into something that was now neither her life nor my previous one, but something new, a third person, built from both, carrying the grief of one and the precision of the other. They called me the Iron Ledger in Seoul because I never made an error. I intended to keep that record. I began to write.